You already have it all completely planned out in your mind. You've been working the grind for the last 20, 30, 35 years, and you've been living in the city. And all you want in your retirement is you want to get away from people. You want to get out into the hill country of Texas. Maybe you want to move to Colorado or Montana somewhere. And you know what your dream house looks like. You and your wife have talked about it. You have it all planned out. The grandkids are going to be there at some point. You've got places for them to fish and all this other stuff. But you still have 5 to 10 years before retirement, and you know that land's not doing anything except getting more and more expensive. So how do you buy that land now, actually make use of it now, but still set aside an area on it to build that dream retirement home? That's what this video is all about. That's what I'm going to help you walk through step by step. What do you do between now and when you start that retirement home? Me personally, with my piece of land, I want something like a nice weekend getaway that, even if it's for a week at a time, I can go away, my family can be comfortable, but I know that I'm going to be able to have to keep that while I build that dream home in the future. And then once I get that dream home built, what does it look like for that property or that getaway that I've built before I move into my dream home? Let's dive into this, because how do you get from A to B before you even worry about C, D, E, and F? The first part of this is you have to clarify your vision. I know that when I get something in my head, I know exactly what I think it looks like. But then when I have to start explaining it to my wife, things sometimes get a little bit fuzzy. And so I really need to get down on a piece of paper and define what that is. I need to know, first of all, where is this property going to be? Is it somewhere like the Texas Hill Country, like I mentioned earlier? Is it out of state? Is it in a different state? Maybe you're not even in Texas, but this is something that you're interested in. What does that location look like? Is it on water? Is it on salt water, fresh water? Is it a lake? Is it a stream? Is it a river? Is it up in the mountains? Is it surrounded by trees? Or is it cleared off with these big, huge meadows where you can watch wildlife? Get specific on what that vision looks like. Then once you have, okay, I've got this in my mind, the next thing is, what does that weekend getaway look like? Is it a one-room cabin? Is it something like I want? That's a really nice 2-bed, 2-bath that then I'm going to end up using as income for a short-term rental in the future when I'm living in my retirement home on the same property. What does the property and the buildings on it look like? I know that if I want a short-term rental that I'm going to be able to rent out and then also have family and friends up while I'm in my retirement home, this property needs to be at least 10 acres. I need to be able to have 2 septic systems on there, probably 1 water source, 1 electric source, but I want these 2 buildings separated so that right now I'm going to maximize some part of that land for my short-term goal, that weekend getaway. But also when I build my dream, I know that that's going to maximize the best part of that property. Maybe it's the biggest view, maybe it's the portion that's waterfront, but it's going to be 2 separate places so that in the future, when somebody's renting or one of my friends is staying in the small piece, I don't have to hear them or see them, but they're still close enough that we can walk and have that gathering time too. So in my vision, I know that I've got to get really specific on the type of property that I want, where I want it to be. I need to be specific on what that small piece looks like now and how it's going to affect the big piece in the future. And then I need to understand, what is the future me living out my retirement dreams there? What does that have to do with the other one that I built? Is it going to be an income producing property? Can I subdivide it off and sell it in the future if I want? That's what I mean about defining your vision. And that is the first goal to this entire thing. You got to be clear on what you want. Now, once you've got that vision of what this is going to look like in your mind, you need to go back, and this is the second part, you need to go back to your land considerations. How do you make that vision come true? If you've got an unlimited budget and you're going to go out and buy, 100 acres or 500 acres or 1,000 acres, whatever that is, okay, it's not hard to get things separated out and make sure that you've got, the views you want for this one and the views you want for that one, or if you want to build 5 or 6 houses on there, that's pretty easy. But if you're a little bit budget constrained, you may have to look for specific features on the property. Let's say that wherever you're buying, you might not be able to afford more than 10 to 15 acres and still keep in the budget for the 2 constructions that you want to do on that property down the road. So What specific land features are going to help you achieve that goal? Do you need a ridge to where you can put a smaller unit on one side of the ridge and the bigger unit on the other side of the ridge? Again, keeping that separation so that you're not having to deal with noise or sight impairments or anything like that. If your dream is to have 2 or 3 properties on a water, okay, then you're going to have to find land with enough water frontage that you can put them all comfortably on there and they're not too tight up on each other. Unless maybe you want that. You want to build that family enclave or that family getaway spot where there's 3 houses that are really close together in proximity so that everybody's got their own retreats to get away from, but at the same time they're really close so grandma and grandpa can run over next door and take care of the grandkids early in the morning while mom and dad go for a walk on the lake. So if you're looking for very specific land considerations, that's the second thing. Now, as you're thinking about land considerations, one of the other things that you've got to keep in mind is, okay, is the zoning going to allow me to do what I want? If you get a smaller piece of land, maybe the local zoning won't allow you to put 2 separate properties or 2 separate buildings on there with 2 separate septics. Maybe you've got to plan it to where they have to be close enough together so where you can run both septics into the same system. That's a massive consideration. What other zoning laws do you have to consider? Well, if you're in an area that doesn't have any zoning, you want to make sure that you can build in a location that's not too close to the property boundaries, because what if the neighbor next door decides to drop a massive something, barn or whatever, right on the property line close to where your house is built? Remember, where your house gets built, if there's nothing next door, you're never going to be able to control that unless you actually own the property. So unless you have plans to buy the next door property, you need to plan for that ahead of time and make sure that you leave screening and stuff up in the middle. One of the other things that I've got to consider, because my dream, and I'll tell you, my dream is having a place in Colorado with massive views that's on the water. Okay, so one of the things that I've got to consider is I need enough property so that I can have big trees around me, that I can still have my views, and also that I can make sure that I don't have to worry about wildfires because I don't have to have trees right up on the house. I can move those things away from the house so I don't have to worry about them burning and falling on top of it. So that's the kind of land considerations that I'm talking about here. The other thing that you really have to think about is, okay, let's say that you have a ridge and you're going to put properties on either side of it. Well, is it going to make sense to build on that? Because you don't want 30 feet of exposed foundation. That seems like a waste and a huge cost for foundation. So then, okay, can you build a pier and beam foundation? Does the land even support that? And then when we're talking about septic systems, can you get a good enough percolation test, and will the county or the state entity, whichever state you're in, will they approve a septic system on that property? These are all things that you've got to think through when you're looking at the land, and those considerations even before you pull the trigger. Can you do what you want to do on that property? Number 3 is when you're going to start having to get together your team. And I'm going to talk about that real quickly. You don't always need a realtor. I'm a realtor. You don't always need one of us. If you have people in that area who can keep you out of trouble, if you have a great builder, potentially an architect, insurance people, lenders, and lenders are really key on this, because especially if you're dealing with something out of state, you've got to have somebody that knows what they're doing locally as a lender. If you have a team together and you don't need a realtor, that's fine. But if you're dealing in an area that you don't really know, or you may not have that builder or these other people that you need, my personal suggestion is go find a realtor. If you don't have anybody in the area that you're looking, let me know. Even though I'm in Texas, I've got realtors throughout the country. And I talk to them all the time about this thing specifically, because I've got plans in my mind for doing this in more than one location. So getting together your team is going to be key in the first part of number 3. Number 3 on its own is you got to give budgeting and your financial considerations a huge devotion of your time, especially if you're buying this ahead of time. Look, one of the reasons people buy land before they retire is so you can start to plan. You can go out, you can spend weeks out there in the fall or the spring, you can cut down trees, start clearing the site, kind of making it your vision as you go. That's what people like to do. But one of the other reasons that you're going to buy ahead of time is because if you're locking in the value of land right now, more than likely that's going to be better than waiting 10 or 15 years to buy land when you're actually retired. So a good thing about this is it's an investment mechanism. It's going to save you retirement money to lock in that land now. But once you have that land locked in, or once you're about to lock that land in, I should say, are you going to finance it or are you going to pay cash? If you're going to pay cash, that's great if you've got enough cash to take care of the land and the construction. But if you don't, you need to talk to a lender to find out, look, does it make more sense to buy this in cash, or should I, put 20 or 25% down, finance it, and buy it with financing, and then use my cash to build something on it? And then if you're going to finance your first construction project on there, how are you going to handle your second construction project? Because usually once you have a livable dwelling on a property, it's going to be harder to get financing for the second one. Sidestep for a second. That's one of the great reasons to buy multiple lots side by side. You can build your first project on one side and get financing for that, and then you can get financing for the construction on the other lot, and it's separate. It's a little harder to do when the lot is combined, but that's one of those major financial considerations. Also, this is a good time to start just contacting builders and saying, hey, look, this is my vision. This is kind of what I want to do. What kind of cost of construction am I looking at? What kind of timeline of construction am I looking at? Now, you'll know whether or not you can trust the builder, because it's actually hard to get some of them to give you a rough idea on costs. Here in Central Texas, I know right now a custom home is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of about $275 for a well-equipped, nice custom home. You could go up to $500-$600 a square foot. You can probably get by for $225. But I know that because I've got builders that I trust that are willing to give me rough ballparks. Now, they'll say, hey, roughly $275. Obviously, if you put really, really nice things in it, or if you have a massive foundation, or if you're doing a really long driveway, stuff like that, if you're very removed from a road, that's all going to escalate the construction cost. You just have to know that ahead of time, but roughly $275. That's what you're looking for when you're starting to plan this out in front. So if you don't have those people on your team, you have to find them. And if you don't have local resources where you're looking, make sure you do your due diligence and try to find those local resources. Again, that's one of the reasons I'm here. I'm more than happy to help. You just got to ask me. Moving along to number 4 now, I'm making the assumption at this point you've got either that land, you've already purchased it, you're under contract, or you have a really good idea of what you're buying. So the next thing is, what do temporary structures look like on there? Does it have a well? Do you need to put a well house to protect it from freezing and stuff like that? Are you going to drill a well very quickly, in order to have water when you're out there? Can you do a temporary septic system? Or are you going to need a temporary structure like an RV or a yurt? A lot of people are using yurts now. I don't get it, but anyway, you can do it. They're pretty cheap. They're kind of cool. I just never stayed in one, so I don't really understand them. But what does the temporary living situation look like? And again, going back to understand, can you do what you want to do? Are you even allowed to? There's areas where you cannot camp in your RV for more than a week at a time. Okay, that's important. There's other ones that if you've started construction, you can be in there for 6 months during construction. So that's another consideration. But again, what do the temporary structures and temporary living situations need to look like for you to make that dream come true? That's the 4th part. I've talked about the 5th part a little bit briefly, but now I'm going to jump back into the legal and zoning considerations. This goes back to, can you do what you want on there? But there's a few things that I didn't hit on a while ago. The first one is easements. Let's say that you want a property that's on a body of water. Again, whether that's a lake or the ocean or whatever. A lot of times there's easements where you can't build very close to the water. You may have this dream of a waterfront compound, but you just can't do it. You have to build so far back up the hill, it's not even waterfront. You've got to walk 200 yards down to the water, which may be cool with you, but again, you need to understand that ahead of time. Going back to number 4 a little bit, talking about temporary structures, I know one of the things that I'm running into a lot of places in Colorado, a lot of counties, and in Colorado, counties have different rules. So there's some counties where you can build a temporary structure. Like I could go build a 10 by 12 building on there, and with the idea that I'm going to lock things in it when I'm not there, and then when I'm there, I'm going to live in there. Okay, that's fine in some counties. Some counties won't allow you to do that. In order to live in a structure, even to camp in it, if it is a built structure, not an RV or a tent or something, but if your plan is to stay in there, you have to have water and wastewater connected to it. So instead of building a $10,000 building that you're going to stay in, sometimes now you have to do a $10,000 building and a $30,000 septic system, and then find a way to get water to it also. So again, all these legal and zoning considerations you have to check out ahead of time. And don't think because you find in one part of the state it's one thing that it's going to be the same way in another part of the state. In most states, the local entities, the counties and the city entities are going to have their own more restrictive restrictions for you to follow. So make sure you know that ahead of time. Number 6 here are insurance considerations. Now, I'm going to start, while I'm filming this video, we've got massive wildfires going on in California. That is currently happening. And you keep hearing stuff about people not having insurance or having insurance or whatever. I'm telling you, insurance is getting way more expensive right now. Case in point, here where I live in Texas, our house was built 8 years ago. From where we started to where we are now is about a 4x increase in insurance. Did my house change? No. Is it under massive risk? No. But about 3 years ago, there was a fairly big wildfire. It was about 400 acres just west of me, and that's causing my insurance to go up. That's just how insurance companies operate. Think about everything that's going on along the Gulf Coast with hurricanes and stuff. It's getting more and more and more expensive to get windstorm and to get hurricane coverage and flood coverage and stuff like that. Another case in point, my properties in Colorado, those are getting more and more expensive. They've doubled in price since we bought them, I think 2 and 3 years ago now. They've doubled in price because of wildfire coverage, because there were a couple of wildfires within about 3 or 4 miles of them. And so now all of a sudden we're in a high wildfire risk area, our insurance is more expensive. So this is a major consideration. It's a financial consideration. There's different types of insurance. Number one, you can have unused land or vacant land coverage. You may think that's dumb, but if you've got a couple of acres somewhere in the mountains or on the water, and some kids are walking down the street and they see a cool rock pile and they want to go play on it, and somebody falls down into a crack, breaks an arm, pops their head open or something like that, who do you think their parents are going to sue? It doesn't matter that it wasn't your fault. It doesn't matter that they were trespassing. They're coming after you. So vacant landowner insurance could be a really good option for you, especially if you've got land out of state. Now, once you start building, I'm going to highly suggest getting a builder insurance. Like, it's an overlay for the contractor. Now, your contractors are going to have their own insurance, but if they're walking around on your property and the same thing happens, let's say you've got a cliff over there and one of their workers is over there looking at the cliff on lunch break and falls off and hits a neck or something, God forbid, we don't want that to happen, but it would be nice to have some type of umbrella policy or a builder risk insurance that overlays the builder so that if something like that happens and they come back to try to sue you, you're covered. Unfortunately, I'm 50 years old. When I was a kid, we weren't so sue happy, but now everybody's sue happy. So you just got to protect yourself. So that additional umbrella layer of a builder risk policy is important. And then once you get your units built, whether it's that luxury short-term weekend getaway or your final dream home, that dream retirement house, having the right insurance in place on those is crucial. You're going to have a normal homeowner's policy on your final product, but if you're renting out, let's say you're renting out your weekend getaway as a short-term rental, they have very specific landlord STR short-term rental policies for insurance to cover that. Because again, you've got people coming in and out and in and out. You're going to want to have coverage against if something happens while people are on your property. Again, it's just mitigating the chances of somebody suing you and absolutely ruining your retirement dreams. I mean, think about it. You saved for 30 or 40 years trying to get to retirement so you can enjoy it. And 5 years before retirement, somebody's at your short-term rental. They fall off of a deck because they got drunk and they break an arm or neck or whatever. Now all of a sudden your retirement plans are sidelined because they're suing you. So you've got to have very, very specific policies in place. And if you don't have an insurance agent that you can talk to about this stuff, let me know. I've got them. They will sit down and walk through all of the risks with you instead of just saying, hey, I got a quote for you. They're going to ask questions. What are you doing? What do you want to do? What do we need to protect against? Tell me about the property. There's a big difference between somebody who's out to sell you a policy and somebody who's out to actually protect you. So make sure that you're taking care of yourself and your family and your retirement dreams. Another thing is, as you're getting additional properties, rental properties, vacation properties, retirement properties, and stuff like that, it really helps to have an umbrella policy that covers your entire nest egg, and that's why they call it an umbrella policy. It's smart to have an umbrella policy that basically will take over. Let's say you've got your short-term rental landlord policy, and if there's something that's not covered in there, if a lawyer finds a way of getting in there and finding a hole in that policy before they can get to you in your retirement, now you've got this umbrella policy over the top to protect you. So I highly recommend umbrella policies too. It's unfortunate that we need as much insurance as we do nowadays, but it provides a lot of peace of mind. Make sure you're considering that. The seventh major consideration, and I try to smile real hard when I talk about this, but it's a little bit sad, right? We're talking about retirement. We're talking about living out the last of our days somewhere where we really, really want to be. So when you're planning out your property, when you're planning out your build, you have got to take into account your future mobility and accessibility. I know when I was 30 years old, I would have loved to have had a 3, 4 story up in the trees and kind of like going down the hill and all this other stuff. But as I get older, my knees don't work as well and my back hurts more and my foot hurts and I got a bunion or whatever. Accessibility is a thing. So you've got to take this into account, and it's not just for inside of your property. Again, I keep going back to this because my dream is more for that mountain home. Well, I know that once I get into my home, I want the fewest amount of steps. But the steps inside of a house, that's the easiest way because that ground is level. Think about for a second, if you have a piece of property that you want to go down to the lake or down to the river, okay? Is it just sloped ground that's covered with leaves and gravel and all this other stuff that you could easily slip on? Or maybe not even me. My parents are both in their 80s now, and I want them to come spend time with me at our property. Well, then I need to really take that into account. I need to have a way to get down to the water easily. I need to have a way to get into the house easily. Maybe it's 10 steps to get up to where you have to get into the house. Okay, do I need to take into account potentially an elevator, or at least block out an area where in the future, if I need an elevator, I can put an elevator in. I don't have to sell that property because I don't have access to it anymore. So again, it's a little bit sad to think about, but you are getting older, and that's why we're talking about retirement property. So take into account from the beginning, how are you going to get around the house? How are you going to get around the property? How are you going to get to the property also? Do you have to have 4-wheel drive? Do you have to have a Jeep to get up there? Okay, that might be fine for you, but in the future, maybe it's not so feasible. Or if you have to have a Jeep to get up there, but you also want to short-term rent it, how many people are going to have 4-wheel drive vehicles that they can access that property in the shoulder seasons? Access and mobility, huge thing to keep in mind. All right, something that's not quite as depressing, number 8 here. Let's talk about utilities and infrastructure. These are major considerations, and it goes to state reason, right? If you're buying a place that you want to connect electricity to, it might be nice if there's an electric line close by. So as you're looking at properties, obviously you're going to look for things like electric poles, but it doesn't stop there. You need to contact the local utilities and find out, hey, what is it going to cost me to get electricity to my property? There used to be a thing where I live where you got a $2,000 credit if you were building a house, and that usually pretty much paid for setting the pole and getting a drop and all of that stuff on your property. That doesn't exist anymore. My house is about 500 feet from the road currently, and the utility company charged me $8,000 to get the lines up here. They set 3 poles and they ran the lines, and it was $8,000. So it can be a major consideration. Outside of that, where are you going to get water from? Do you have access to municipal water? Are you going to have to drill a well? If you have to drill a well, can you actually drill a well? Is there water there? Again, local resources on something like that are absolutely key. Can you do rainwater collection? Here in Texas, I've got about 29,000 gallons of rainwater for my house. That's our only source of water, and it's amazing. But Colorado, again, for example, there's some little caveats there, but for the most part, you can't capture more than 500 gallons of water. Now, they do have a lot of cisterns that you can put in the ground or under the house, and you can haul water in, but you're hauling it in 2,000 gallons at a time for about $150 a pop. That can get expensive. So how are you going to get water to the property? Outside of that, what are you going to do with your wastewater? Do you have city wastewater available? Are you going to have to put in a septic system? Septic systems right now, $25,000 to $35,000, depending on the size and location. And again, will the state allow you to? Will your property properly discharge the wastewater? In other words, are the percolation tests good? Do you have to come up with a different consideration for wastewater for a sewer system, like maybe a sand bed is what you need? So there's different considerations there, and they all have different costs. How are you going to get that done? The other thing a lot of people don't realize or don't think about, oh, you found this perfect property. It's awesome. Oh my God, I love this place. And you start planning the house, but do you have access to internet? Do you have access to cell phone? Most people think now to look down, check the bars on their phone, but a lot of times internet It's not enough through your phone, even if you have 2 bars. Okay, we've got Starlink now, which is a thing, but it also is not quite as good as landline internet from a speed perspective and a latency perspective. So you have to take that into account. Is it something that's important to you? And if it is, what is it going to cost to get you good, reliable service? So utility considerations are absolutely massive. Make sure that you're making note and making account for those things. Rolling right along with number 9 now. Let's talk about how you're going to maintain and upkeep your property. If it's a small property, no problem. If it's close by, to where you are now, no problem. If it's states away, problem. Again, if you have something in a place like Colorado, California, where wildfires are prevalent, how are you going to make sure that your property is taken care of so that you mitigate your wildfire risk? How are you going to make sure to take care of your grass? How are you going to make sure to take care of your landscaping and things like that? You may not want any landscaping, you may not want any grass, that's fine, but that's a decision that you have to make. And if you do want that, what is the cure for what you have? You can have property management companies, and personally, I think I've got really good property management companies, but at the same time, they fall down on the job. I've had neighbors call me, hey, your grass is 4 foot tall around your house. They haven't cut it this year yet, and it's starting to brown. If we get a fire, it's going to burn right up to your house, and it's going to burn your house. Okay, I call the management company and like, hey guys, take care of this stuff for me. And isn't it funny how I'm old, so it's like this is calling on the phone versus this. Anyway, take care of this for me, but at least I have a resource there. If I'm not in Colorado when it's really, really cold, who's going to winterize the house? Who's going to make sure that my outside hose bibs are taken care of and aren't going to freeze? Who's going to make sure that my water lines don't freeze and everything like that? Or that I have electricity or heat is on or all of that other stuff. If you have properties with buildings that are built, you have to have a plan to take care of them. So make sure that you're taking that into account up front. Number 10 is one of those future planning things, and it may not be a consideration for you, and I'll tell you why. If your plan for your property, this dream retirement property that you have, is that property is going to survive you, maybe you're going to place it into a trust, it's going to pass on to your kids or grandkids or whatever, this may not be a big consideration. But if you have dreams outside of this, or maybe this is a 15-year goal, and then you've got a different goal for beyond that, like your old retirement versus your young retirement, if you will, if that's even a thing, you're going to have to take into account market trends and future saleability. If there's any plan at all to sell this thing, you have to make sure that it's something that somebody else will buy and that they see the value of what you're doing. You can build a really cool, unique property, but if you're going to have to sell it in 12 years or 10 years, 15 years, it may not be worth what you think it is. If you've got 100 acres and you put $1 million into construction on the house, but you can only sell it for $1.2 million when you're all in $2 million down the road, that's not a really good investment, and you're not going to be able to take that money and do your next thing with it. So take into account when you're designing things and when you're thinking about your property, can I actually resell this thing in the future if that's my goal? And that's everything from the location to the design of the house to the design of if there's 2 houses or 3 houses or 4 on there, is it something you can sell? Another thing to take into account is maybe your goal is to have a small weekend place now, but then sell that one in the future and build your bigger one on the same property. Again, you need to find out now, can you subdivide that land and sell the smaller one off? Because a lot of times in states, and this goes back to deed restrictions and stuff, can you sever that property, or are you locked in to where that is one property and you won't be able to sell that smaller one? Again, a lot of times it makes more sense to buy multiple lots side by side if you can find the right one, so that in the future, okay, I know that I'm going to build 1,000 square feet now. That's going to be our weekend getaway. It's going to be our summer getaway, whatever. And then once our major retirement home is built, then we're going to sell this one off, and there's no problem because it's a separate lot. So take into account, what does the future look like from a resale perspective? Number 11, the 11th consideration here, and I've mentioned this a little bit in number 10, is what does this look like from a estate planning perspective? Are you going to keep this property long term, and when you die, is it going to go, is this going to be a multi-generational weekend escape or mountain escape or beach escape or whatever that is? In other words, is it going to go to your kids and then your grandkids and so on and so forth? If so, you need to make that known to them, and you need to have that in writing. And it's funny, we laugh about it all the time, but in my mother-in-law and father-in-law's will, the property was given to my wife and her sister, and the specification is it cannot be sold. I don't know. You can do that. Like that can be your wishes. So if you want this thing and you're hard and fast, this thing's going to stay in the family for generations, then talk to your estate planning attorney and tell them, I don't want this property sold. If it's sold, it reverts to the state or something. I don't, or to your alma mater or whatever. But you have to plan on that up front. If you have multiple lots, okay, who's going to get it? Is it going to go, do you have 4 lots and 4 kids, or 5 lots and 4 kids, and everybody's going to get their own thing when you're gone? Okay, great. But also, and this is what I mentioned earlier, do you put this into a trust? And by putting it into a trust now, I know there's some tax benefits when you do die, and it could help save the family money. And there's, once it's in that trust, it's locked in and not going to be any changing what happens with it. Okay, maybe that's a consideration. I'm not the person for that. That's an estate planning attorney. And, if you need recommendations for that, again, I got them. Just let me know. But take care of making those plans now, because, that's the funny thing about making plans is God's got a weird way of making our plans not work. And again, it's getting a little bit morbid, but maybe you make plans for 20, 30 years in the future because you're retiring early at 55, and man, your parents lived in their 90s, and man, we're going to have this great retirement, and then somebody gets sick or something bad happens with an accident, and the future is on us right now rather than us being able to plan later. So as you're doing this as a part of your retirement planning, take care of setting up the estate and the will and all of that stuff ahead of time so that you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about having this conversation with your kids later. It's already planned out. When your retirement home is done and the kids and the grandkids are there, you guys are just chilling, making s'mores, fishing, hiking, doing all that stuff, because the planning's already been done. So take care of that estate planning stuff from the beginning. Now, I'm going to reiterate to you just for a second on all this stuff. There's a lot of steps here, and at this point, we're a long way into this video because there's a lot of considerations to be made. But just like you've done in your business, and again, if you're watching this video, and especially if you're at this point, you're evidently like a CEO, very high end, maybe an engineer, because you're planning ahead, self-employed, something like I know you because you are me. So we have got to be methodical and not pass up any of these steps. And there may be even a couple of steps that I've forgotten about, but we've got to be methodical with this so that when we get to the end product, we don't look back and regret and say, damn it, I wish I had done this differently, or I wish I had done this differently. You've got a little bit of time until that dream retirement home is built, or even your weekend getaway is built. You've got a little time, so don't try to shortcut the process. Make sure that you're taking all the considerations into consideration. If you need that team, build that team very well. Build that team like you built your business. I always hear that be slow to hire and quick to fire, that type of thing. So make sure that you're taking that into account with these steps as you're planning out what this dream retirement is going to look like for you.